Hey there, darlings. Welcome to the Farmer's Table. I'm Jess. This is my kitchen, and today we are making ahead some cinnamon rolls. Now, I'm publishing this video the week of Christmas, where you might be looking for a special recipe to feed your family breakfast on Christmas morning, and you don't really relish the idea of waking up 2.5 hours before you want to serve that and making a huge mess of the kitchen when the rest of the house is frankly going to be made a mess of. So we can do the dirty work ahead of time, make it simple so that all you have to do the morning of serving this breakfast is pull it out of the freezer, let the second rise happen, and then bake it in the oven. Another thing to keep in mind as far as using this recipe is it is really great for giving as a gift. I don't know about you, the older I get, the faster these holiday seasons come back around, and I find myself looking at the same stuff over and over in the stores thinking, did I just buy that? Like, it just gets to the point where you get a little bit tired of all the stuff that's involved, all the spending money that's involved. And as a mom, a busy mom, if somebody brings me something that they did the dirty work on, that they prepared, that they made a mess of their kitchen and cleaned it up so that I don't have to make a mess of mine, that's a pretty good gift. So I'm actually making some extra pans of cinnamon rolls this year to give frozen to some friends. Just drop them off at their house with baking instructions so they can enjoy a special breakfast without having to make a mess. All right, so the recipe that I use for cinnamon rolls and I will share with you today is one that I had found on a blog, and I have since modified it enough that it's really, I do things quite differently than that blog. It is written as a single pan recipe. So one batch makes, I just pulled these out of the freezer to show you guys how you can make them ahead. I'm gonna bake them. It makes one like 9x13 pan with 12 cinnamon rolls, and they're good size too. They're frozen. They haven't done the second rise yet, so they're gonna get really big. This pan will be like completely full to the brim once they're iced. So it's a pretty good batch in and of itself. I always double it. So today I'm going to be using amounts that are a double batch. The written recipe is for a single batch. Keep that in mind whenever you print it out and start putting it together. So typically if I'm making something like cinnamon rolls, you know, a lot of times, since it is more involved, is when we have guests. So I'll make the double batch so that there's plenty for everybody that's here. But if I'm making them and it's just my kids are at home, one pan is plenty for them. I still make the double batch and I go ahead and freeze one of the pans because I'm already getting my mixer dirty. I'm already going to be rolling this out on the counter. I'm making the mess. I might as well go ahead and make the same exact mess for 2 different breakfasts. So the first step is to start proofing the yeast. I've got it written down as just dry yeast, and so I want to make a note on this. People always ask, well, is it instant or is it not? That doesn't actually matter. You can use those interchangeably. The place that matters is in like a bread machine because active dry yeast does need to be proofed, whereas instant yeast is just small enough granules that it can be mixed into dry ingredients and still rise. But even with instant yeast, which is what I use because it's what I'm able to buy bulk, I do so much baking that the little packets don't make economic sense. But I always proof my yeast anyway because it doesn't hurt anything to proof it, and it shows you that your yeast is still active. It saves you from that really heartbreaking experience of mixing a bunch of ingredients together and coming back an hour later expecting your dough to have doubled and it hasn't moved at all. So I've got 1 cup of lukewarm water. Make sure it's not too hot. You do want it warm enough to actually wake the yeast up, but if it's too hot it will damage it. And you want a pack of yeast per batch, which is like 2 1/4 teaspoons. So I'm gonna go with like about 1.5 tablespoons here. And I put in a teaspoon of sugar also. When you mix sugar in with your proofing yeast, it just like wakes it up and gets it good and bubbly quicker because it gives it something to start to develop with and consume. All right, so I'm gonna mix those together and leave them here within the next 5 minutes or so. That's gonna be super bubbly. And while that is proofing, I'm gonna go ahead to my mixer and start putting together these ingredients. Into my mixer, I am putting 2 cups of warm water, about the same amount of warmth that I proofed that yeast with. I'm doing 1 cup of granulated sugar. Remember, this is a double batch. And I'm doing 6 tablespoons of softened butter and 1 tablespoon of salt. I'll run this, get that good and mixed. Now, if you forgot to soften butter, you can like melt it some in the microwave. You can just put really hot water in here and that will melt it. Keep in mind, if you do anything that's gonna add a lot of heat to this, it needs to cool back off before you add your yeast mixture back in. So here's my proofed yeast mixture. It's good and bubbly. If you're not seeing lots of bubbles and rising happen, you need new yeast. Don't put a bunch of ingredients in that. It's not gonna do what you want. I'm gonna go ahead and mix this in. Teaspoon of vanilla. This is vanilla bean paste. You can also do vanilla extract. Now I'm going to start putting 2 cups of flour into this mixture and letting it mix until it is well incorporated. Now here I have bread flour. You can use all-purpose. I've used all-purpose on this before. I've also used whole wheat. You're going to get like a toothier cinnamon roll with whole wheat. Obviously, white flour is typically a little lighter. Definitely not looking like a dough yet. Still very much like a loose batter with just 2 cups of flour. By doing this, it allows all of those ingredients like the vanilla and the salt to just incorporate through as we add all the flour so that it's even throughout the dough. So now we're going to add 7 more cups of flour. The total for the entire double batch is 9. You can go up to 10 total. This recipe is obviously using measurements instead of weight, and I understand that weight can be more exact. But with making any sort of dough, like any sort of yeast risen dough or any dough at all, even any leavened dough, there are so many factors that go into it, like the humidity, the weather, if it's raining, stuff like that. So this turns out for me every time just going on measurements, so that's just what I do. So I'm gonna start the mixer, and I'm going to add 1 cup at a time, 7 more cups, and see where it stands. Just make sure that each cup you add is being integrated before you put the next one in. All right, so this is 7 cups added, and the dough is gonna be sticky-ish. You really don't want it to be so sticky that you can't like touch it and pull your fingers away. You can see my fingers are coming away mostly clean. The dough's not sticking to the wall. It is forming a ball. I'm seeing a little bit of sticking here to the center part of my mixer. So I think I'm gonna add about 1/4 cup more, but this is pretty close to where I want it. Don't stress this part too much, because even if your dough like is on the sticky side, it's just gonna be a little harder to handle, but it'll still rise and make a good cinnamon roll. And this is something that you really get the hang of after you make something a handful of times. You really know what it is that you're looking for. I would say err on the side of like stickier and potentially too little flour rather than adding a whole bunch because you're trying to get what you think is going to be a good stiff dough, because then you're more likely to have like really stiff or tough cinnamon rolls. Now I'm going to turn the mixer speed up to medium and let this knead. It has the dough attachment, the kneading attachment in here, dough hooks, and let it knead for like 4 minutes or so. I want this to become smooth looking. So here's a good example of what I want to see with my dough. You can see it's forming a ball. It's fully pulling away from the walls. There's no sticking that's happening. And this ball means my dough is really getting kneaded well by my mixer. If you've been with me very long, you've probably seen me go through great lengths to not dirty extra dishes to wash, but this is one place where I'll make an exception. I'm gonna go ahead and oil a bowl to rise my dough in. If I were mixing in a different mixer, I would just let it rise in this. But this particular mixer has this center mechanism, and letting things rise in here, stuff gets stuck to it and dry to it, and it's just not worth the extra bowl. I'd rather wash this bowl and wash this when it's fresh and wash this later when it's harder. So I'm going to put my dough into this bowl. You can see it's still kind of sticky. I actually don't do any sort of like window pane tests or anything like that with this. Cinnamon rolls I find are just pretty forgiving, and I want them to be soft. I would rather err on the side of slightly, you know, less developed than overdoing it and them getting tough. I have tools for this to scrape your bowls called a dough scraper, and I own it. I have one, probably more than one, but I committed here and made a mess of my hands. All right, so I always put it in the bowl, give it a couple of kneads so that it's just a nice smooth ball, so it'll rise good and evenly. Of course, I had greased this bowl, so that kind of greases the dough. I have a little oil sprayer here. I usually go give it a couple more sprays on top. You can see there. I'm going to cover this with a damp towel. Because this is a dough that has a good deal of yeast in it and a lot of sugar, it's going to rise really fast because that yeast has got something to feed it. So this doubles typically in about 30 minutes is how long it takes to rise, maybe 40 if you keep your house cooler. If you do keep your house cooler and you need, you want it to go faster, you can turn the light on your oven and put the bowl in there. Just make sure nobody in your house is going to come preheat your oven, or stick it on top of the fridge, just somewhere in the kitchen where it's going to be a little warmer. All right, my dough has doubled, actually probably a little more than that because I got a little distracted story of my life. Here it is, looking lovely. I'm going to flour a surface. I'm going to turn all of this dough out onto this surface, and I want to get it in a shape where I can easily half it, because remember, I've doubled it, so I'm making 2 pans, which means I need to make 2 logs to cut into my rolls. Okay, put this half over here. I'll do that one in a minute. Flour this a little bit, not too much. Now I want to start with as close to a rectangle-ish shape as I can, because I want to roll this out into a rectangle. All right, that's probably about 1/2 inch thick, and I'd say like 18 inches this way, maybe 12 this way, something like that. So this doesn't have to be exact, but because I want to fill my whole pan with 12 cinnamon rolls, I like to go about this size. So though I've been like doubling everything the whole time to make a double batch, I actually mix my filling per roll. So this is like one single recipes of filling. The reason I do that is if I mix it together and I think, oh, I'm going to split this in half and I'm going to spread my first roll with half and then I'm going to spread my second roll with half, I just have no self-control, and the first roll ends up being like super filled, and then the second roll I don't have enough to put on there. So I just mix them separately. You can mix them together if you're better at gauging what half looks like, but yeah, this is 1 roll's worth of filling. I'm going to mix this, spread it, and then do this again. Now for our filling, about 8 tablespoons of softened butter, a cup of brown sugar, not packed, just loose, 1.5 tablespoons of cinnamon, and 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract or vanilla paste. And we're gonna mix this together. Now, you may be tempted to melt your butter here, and if you need to soften it in the microwave and it gets a little bit melty, that's okay. But I really discourage using like truly melted butter, because it just makes it really difficult for this to spread without running out. You want this to really stick to the dough and not be spilling out. You want it to really incorporate together here. You can see it's kind of like a thick, almost doughy, pasty type situation. You can do this by just spreading it with a spatula, or you can take it and just kind of spread it out with your hands, which is fine. You do want it to be relatively even across there. All right, there we go. Now I'm going to start rolling. I go from the outside in, and just do this slowly so you make sure that you're staying nice and tight. Tucking this dough in on itself rather than just rolling it, which will give you gaps and it'll make your cinnamon rolls fall apart more. Okay. Sometimes I'll kind of push this to make sure that I'm not stretching it out. Now, I bought these throwaway pans bulk online for this application because I knew I was going to be giving those away to people. Obviously, you can cook this in whatever pan. I've have glass pans and stone pans that I've put all of these in and frozen. It is very important if you are taking something like glass or stone out of the freezer that you do fully let those thaw, like that there's not going to be any sort of shock taking that cold pan and putting it in a preheated oven. Alright, so I'm going to give this a little spray. Now, when I cut this log, I always start at the middle just so I can keep it even. Because I'm looking for 12, I just want to get 6 out of each side. And then I go to the middle of each one of these. That way I don't end up with some that are like super thick and then some that are super thin. And so each one of these I'm going to try to cut into 3, just like this. There are tricks, you know, where you can actually take like a piece of thread and put it around these and pull it. A good serrated knife does the trick. So a lot of times on the end roll, it'll end up being just a little wonky. I don't mind it. Because it's usually a little thinner than the others, I just take it and flatten it down a little bit to make it about the same thickness. I'm gonna take these and fill this pan. I do absolutely suggest using a pan with walls. I've seen people do cinnamon rolls on like baking sheets, but these walls are going to help maintain the softness of these and keep them from drying out around the edges. So there we have our pan of cinnamon rolls ready to be frozen. Since I'm doubling the batch, this is the only place where the doubling is extra work. I'm just going to do that exact same process again with the other side, but I'll show you first how we freeze this. You need to put something where it's going to be against the dough. You don't want to have a bunch of like blank open air putting it in your freezer, because that gives ice crystals the ability to form, which causes freezer burn, and we don't want that. Because I'm going to be taking these to people like this week, I'm really just freezing them until they're frozen, and then I'm going to be delivering them to people. I'm just going to put a sheet of aluminum foil over and press it down to where I'm pressing it against the dough. It's going to protect it in the freezer. This is going to be it for me. I know it's not really the most beautiful presentation, but it's fine. Nobody expects that from me. They make these aluminum pans that have lids you could put on top of that. And also, if you are going to be freezing these for more than like a week or so in your freezer for your own personal use, or you want to give them to somebody to use much later, wrap it in plastic wrap after this, or put it in like a real big Ziploc bag or something. You just want to give another layer of protection of this dough from the freezer, where it's not going to get freezer burnt. But for my purposes, this is good, and this is going to go directly in the freezer just like this. Okay, so what do you do with your now frozen prepared cinnamon rolls? First, you're going to preheat your oven to 375, and you're going to pull that pan out of the freezer. One note, a deep freezer does freeze more solidly than like the freezer that's in your refrigerator. For the sake of them thawing out as quick as possible, I actually prefer to keep them in the refrigerator freezer inside the house. But if you only have a deep freezer, just keep in mind it may take an extra like 15-20 minutes for them to thaw. On average, I would say pulling them out to where they're thawed enough to cook is about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on your house. First thing, take the foil off the top, any wrapping you have, so that they're sitting out and the warm air of the house can get to them. Now, this is after mine have thawed for an hour. You can see they haven't risen very much. It's completely okay. They're actually still quite cold. I would even say in the middle they're pretty firm, but for the most part these are thoroughly thawed, so I can go ahead and bake them. I pulled this pan out about an hour ago so that it could thaw. Once they are thawed and you're about to put them in the oven, take half a cup of heavy cream and pour it over the top of these, drizzling just like this. What this is going to do is two things. This liquid is going to create steam because it's coming up from the base of these things, and that steam is going to lend to like a really gooey texture. Also, this cinnamon filling as it cooks may melt down some, and with the heavy cream down in the bottom, it's going to sort of caramelize and just make it really gooey, and the entire thing is going to soak that up. All right, now we're going to put these in the 375-degree oven. 35 minutes later, I just pulled these out of the oven. You can see right here, they're starting to get nice and brown around the edges. For the icing, I'm back to my mixer. You can do this by hand, but I find the mixer with the whisk attachment is way faster. So I am doing a double batch of this icing. I'll put the written recipe down. It's the basic cream cheese icing. The recipe is for a single batch. We want a whole block of cream cheese softened, as well as a whole stick of butter softened. Try to soften those in the microwave. Not ideal, but such is life. I'm gonna turn that on. And I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla paste or 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And into this, I'm going to add 4 cups of powdered sugar. You may need a pause to scrape down the sides. Now, if you're giving this as a gift, putting it in like a mason jar is a really cute way to do it, or you can just put it in a plastic bag that they can cut the edge of to pipe out. If you want to do like a more basic icing, you can just mix like 2 to 3 tablespoons of heavy cream per cup of powdered sugar and add vanilla to it, and that makes a pretty good icing. If you want to do orange sweet rolls, you can add 2 to 3 tablespoons of orange juice per cup of powdered sugar and make a really good orange icing. I really like a cream cheese icing, and this is obviously very, very sweet, but it's not as sweet as like just a straight powdered sugar and cream icing. When you are making your icing with a lot of butter and cream cheese, let your cinnamon rolls cool for like 10 minutes, not very long, after they come out of the oven. You still want them to be warm when you ice them, but you don't want them to be so hot that they liquefy the butter in your icing, because then it's just not gonna be as well spread. If you like your cinnamon rolls like just completely slathered with icing, you can take this cream cheese recipe and add like an extra cup of powdered sugar with a couple tablespoons of cream to whatever degree you want to stretch this. And that also works. Honestly, icings are not something that I normally really even measure. I've written down measurements for the sake of sharing with other people, but I usually just wing it. All right, friends, there we have our make-ahead cinnamon rolls. Now, one of these is going with me to a Christmas party tonight. The other one is for my boys. My son Asher just came home, so I'm gonna actually break into this so you guys can see what they look like. There we have it. Nice, steamy, delicious cinnamon roll. I don't think he'll complain if I break this in half for you to see the inside structure. Oh my gosh, that smells so good. There you go. Lovely. Yeah, baby, here, this is for you.
I was gonna say, do you need me to turn this down?
Turn what down?
I'm watching a show.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
Too loud.
No. Here you go.
I forgot that you were recording.
No, it's okay. There you go.
Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome, my love. So I want to show you all the bottom of this pan, just in case you were curious what it looked like with pouring the heavy cream in. Like, there's not a bunch of stuff. It pretty much soaks up all of that cream, but whereas if you don't put that in, like the cinnamon on the bottom of the pan may be a little more solidified. Here, it's more caramelly. I hope this video helps you. I hope you feel empowered to do this, and that maybe it makes its way into your family's traditions, or gives you an idea that you can give a gift to some friends without breaking the bank. Thank you for hanging out with me today and all the days you do. I bless you. Until next time.